start from the beginning. Tell me, how did you get involved in Attack of the Show? What's your personal story and where you got to you got a paycheck and you're working on G4 TV? Like what was that? What was that pathway? And then what was and also for a lot of people, the job that you started with is not necessarily the job that you ended with. And a lot of people were freelance and kind of came and went. I don't know your story in your beginning. I don't know I don't know the secret origin of Joe Lynch.
My origin story with Attack of the Show, actually, you could go back even further than where Attack of the Show started to where G4 started. So I was a cameraman in New York City, or as I like to call it, an aspiring filmmaker. But I was a cameraman at the time after I had quit my job at Troma. As a writer, and I needed a job, and I wanted to be in New York City, and through a friend of a friend, they got me a job as a cameraman at pseudo.com. Now, if you don't know what pseudo.com is, it was ostensibly the first network on the internet back in the 56K days, where Joshua Harris, who is this eccentric millionaire who was kind of a capital investor. He was an internet consultant, if you will, right around the time when this was in 99, 2000, when everybody was hinging and betting on the internet being the next real big thing for commerce. And because bandwidths were getting faster and you could actually have live streaming on TV back then, Josh started Pseudo. Pseudo had its own video game component, which was AGN, All Games Network. In that little enclave of talent, you had Scott Rubin, Jim Downs, and a bunch of the different hosts who had a live show that was going on every week. I became one of the cameramen for that live show, and because I was just I grew up on Sam Raimi and Peter Jackson and all of these filmmakers who love to fuck around with the camera a little bit. I was doing all these weird shots when we were doing the live show that they really enjoyed. So they would actually request me to be camera 4. I was camera 4 for about a year and a half, where I had to be in the city. I lived in Long Island at the time, but I had to I had to take the train into New York City for the 5 o'clock show so that they could get all these crazy interstitial shots in and out. And it had its moment. Pseudo had a moment. There's actually a documentary about it. But then when Pseudo got bought out by CNN, the writing was on the wall, and the first people who were just like, hasta lasagna, were Jim and Scott. And they had already set up a plan to do something that was purely video game based out in LA. So they left first. I stuck around for a little bit longer, then decided, this is just definitely not for me. And and Pseudo just kind of dissolved at that point. I was in New York City doing a show called Uranium for Fuse, when I was done with New York. This was after 9/11, and I decided it's time for greener pastures. So going out to LA, I had no job. I didn't know what the hell we were going to do. And I got a call from Jim Downs saying, hey, we have this new network. We have this company called G4, and we're doing the show called Arena, which was the multiplayer game. It was the group player game television show that they had. And I think at that time they had only had Arena and the news show. I think it was Pulse or something like that. But they needed a camera guy. So I ended up going down there, grabbing a camera, throwing it over my shoulder. And we shot, I think, 3 or 4 shows that day. And Jim was like, oh man, I miss having your camera be one of our voices. Would you be interested in doing more of these? And this is, again, pre-Attack of the Show time. This is where they had 3 or 4 shows. And then I think at the time they were also, of course, showing a shitload of other people's work, like Cops and Cheaters. A lot of it was filler, but there were these certain shows that they had that was original programming. But again, it was also purely gaming based. And I love that. I mean, I grew up a gamer. So to be able to be part of something that felt so fresh and so innovative at the time. But we were also getting criticisms. I remember being there when G4 was in the first building before we moved to the studio on Olympic Boulevard. I remember people just there were whispers of, will anybody want to watch video games on television? Do we want to have it where people feel like they're the friend that's on the couch going, give me the controller? It was an interesting debate at the time, but we were moving so fast. And all of a sudden, I got hired not just as a freelance, but as one of the staff camera guys. And this was for all the shows, for X-Play, for Attack of the Show. Anytime that they needed a cameraman that was in the field, so to speak. I wasn't a studio guy. I was more the field guy. They hired me and Mike Dunn, Josh, AP was my sound guy. So we had these two teams, and we would just sit in the office all day. No, I shouldn't say sit in the office all day. We were on standby all day with our cameras, and anytime someone like Casey Schreiner or Mike Shaw or any of these producers would come up with a bit or come up with a news angle, we would be employed, and we would go out and jump in the van and we would shoot. And from there, we were just part of the collective G4 team. And then when Attack of the Show hit, that to me was where I feel like the peak of G4 occurred, mainly because they found an outlet that could employ the games, the pop culture, the kind of eccentric offbeat humor all into one fell swoop. And growing up in the MTV era where TRL was huge, there wasn't another show like that for us. It felt like at the time that Attack of the Show was our TRL, and done in a way that felt like fresh, and it felt like on the pulse of where the zeitgeist was at the time. And it was great because we would come up with like if there was a joke about Batman from the first Batman Begins or The Dark Knight, like Mike Shaw would be like, all right, I'm throwing on the suit and we're going to grab Kevin and we're just going to go out and just come up with shit. And what was great about that, what was so invigorating about that, was they kind of leaned on me to be able to come up with the kind of visuals that we needed to make it look like a film, or try to make it so that we could have the particular cinematic lighting or particular camera moves. Like, they were very smart in hiring like guys like me and Mike Dunn as they used to call them remote cinematographers. But we were filmmakers, and we loved being able to just be told, all right, what are we doing today? Oh, we're going to be running around Tokyo with a giant squid. Check. Okay. What do you do with that? And it was so exciting because it felt like, I know there's that old adage, it was like the Wild West out there. It really was. I mean, being in those offices or in those cubicles when G4 and then obviously with Attack of the Show, it felt so exciting. It was like punk rock. It was the punk rock of television at the time. We did have a home on, as a network, but it was still untested, and we didn't know, like, is anybody watching? I mean, there would be every 6 months or so, there would be a staff meeting where they would gather everybody together, and then, one of the heads of the network would get up and just say, like, all right, we got a little more money. Well, let's keep it going here. But really, it was Attack of the Show that started things off in a way that felt like we were finally clicking into something. I mean, X-Play was very much focusing on games only, which was great. Like what Morgan and what Adam were doing with that show, and everybody who was involved in that show, from Matt Kyle to Jerry Duggan. I mean, Jerry ended up doing stuff for Attack of the Show, but those guys knew that they had the gaming stuff covered. But who was covering everything else? Who was covering not just games, but movies and music and DVDs or Blu-rays at the time? Everything that was happening on the internet. That's where Attack of the Show came in, and it felt like, and you never knew what to expect next. That was what was so exciting about being in that set, was there was, at any given day, someone's going to be doing a hot dog contest, or there's going to be, our production manager is going to order a 36 by 36 In-N-Out burger that is going to sit by his desk for the next 3 days as he slowly but surely eats it down. Like, you never knew what you were going to get. So I to be honest, I remember proposing a show about the behind the scenes of Attack of the Show like every day, because it felt like an episode of The Office. You never, like, it was so exciting to know, like, anything could happen at any given moment. And that's before the show aired. And then you have a live show where anything could happen there. So yeah, it was really exciting times.
That I need to say. I interviewed Mike Dunn and AP. Your name came up. I'm interviewing Josh on Monday. This explains something to me that I never knew, that you effectively directing those scenes. That's why that stuff was so good. That's why those satirical pieces, those Batman things with Mike Shaw turned out so well, is you're a filmmaker. You know, you know all those references, you know even how to like frame it and light it and shoot it. And there was such a truthfulness to those bits. I mean, they were small throwaway bits, like the cold opens, or, you know, some of the like the standalone little like parody pieces. Mm-hmm. Now I understand why they worked so well, is because you were behind the camera doing that stuff. Like, that just makes so much sense. And I know your role evolved later I want to get to, I mean, and also you more than a few people have brought up, like, the behind the scenes of Attack Show was weird. Now, I also think that part of that came from, like, when I came to it, I had already done so much television that I didn't like it. I worked for IFC, I worked for Stars, I worked for, who else? I just did a bunch of different stuff, and I didn't like it. It just felt too corporate and too stifling, and I couldn't be myself. And working at G4 was the very first time, and it was Gavin Purcell who hired me with no audition, just hired me out of the blue. I said, I just want to be able to be myself on camera. It was the first time I was allowed to, and I felt like there was almost this blissful ignorance amongst most of the people that were there, that, like, they didn't know what they couldn't do because no one was telling them they couldn't do it. Does that make sense? And could you elaborate on that a little bit? And I'm going to go away because I'm muting myself too. So
no problem.
Like that, the environment, because I felt it was so creative. Again, no one was telling you couldn't do something. Obviously, you couldn't say asshole. Even though I got away with mispronouncing swear words later, I found a loophole. So
really?
Yes, Keith, the standards and practices guy, when you moved to the E building, I said, God, I really want to say that this director's a shithead. Can I just mispronounce shithead? And he started thinking, he goes, yeah, you can do that. So I said that this director was a shatheed. And no one knew. There's like so many things that are going to come out that were behind the scenes stuff, or stuff that like happened like kind of like around the periphery of the frame, that are going to be illustrated in this documentary that I think are going to surprise people. And we have like the examples to show. It's going to be funny. But can you talk a little bit about that creative environment, and then sort of move from that and segue into, how did Attack of the Show get named Attack of the Show? That is a story that, can I just say this? Brian Keller told me his version of that story, and he cried telling it. He broke down in tears because it was, and just to refresh your memory, there was a contest for names, and
I remember they had asked everybody to like throw in a name or two.
I'm gonna go off camera, and I want you to kind of tell me about the environment and then tell me about the naming. But here's what happened from what I'm getting different stories from this. I don't know. I want to find out what some of the other names were proposed that were serious, in contention. Like, there was actually a contest. So what were some of the other names? The second thing was Attack of the Show. Originally, when the name was like, we think we're going to do this name, and it was derided. People did not, the general consensus among, not everybody, but like, that's a dumb name. That's stupid. I remember hearing it for the first time myself and thinking, that's kind of lame, whatever. But Mike Shaw wrote this manifesto that, according to Brian Keller,
I remember.
Okay, so I need that story. I need you to tell it. I'm going to go away, and I'm going to try not to cry. But this is going to be like in the moment, the way it's going to, I'm telling you this because, you're a filmmaker and you need to know. This is the moment in the doc that's going to come around like the end of Act 1. That's going to be the I shall become a bat moment. You know what I mean?
Got it.
Batman comics, like that's the way it's going to be played. Like getting to that moment, like I want people to see that and get chills hearing the manifesto read aloud. I'll get Morgan Freeman or a Morgan Freeman sound alike. My friend John Bailey. John Bailey is a friend of mine who does the guy
who does the voice, right?
He does. Yeah, he does. Ryan. He's the voice. You should come to our award show. I assume you'll get nominated at some point. Robert Jester was in Frank Meyer for a music doc that they did.
Dude, I shot that fucking doc.
You should have come to the party. We did it at a drive-in. It was weird. COVID rules were back in April.
I got pictures of him and Frank on fucking mushrooms going like, look, we're here. Woo. I'm like,
oh my God. Yeah, exactly. Well, look, next year you're coming, but so talk a little bit about like the environment in those early days and maybe sort of the blissful ignorance, and then segue into how did the show get its name and get to that, like that moment where Mike Shaw wrote that thing. And Brian Keller's memory was that he said he read it aloud to a group of people. He got chills and Brian Keller like broke down crying. Then he emailed me after, he said, don't put me crying in the doc. Don't put me crying in the doc. So, which I'm not going to do that. Maybe just you'll hear him breaking down, but he told me some great stuff. But can you tell from where you sat in that? And like, that's how I plan to play it in the doc, is like this huge moment, like the show got its name, and then act 2 is like finding the voice.
So what was it like being in the Attack of the Show bubble? I remember there was a book that came out a couple of years ago about what was it like working at National Lampoon. They had made a movie about it too, called A Futile and Stupid Gesture, that David Wayne directed. And like that, or any of those movies like Boogie Nights, where they show you in the first act how it is the Wild West, where people are, kind of left to their own devices. There were no rules, or at least there were rules, and people would just say, fuck it, or I don't know, ignorance is bliss. That's kind of the energy that was in those original days, at the Olympic Boulevard studio. That was where we resided. There was this kind of no holds barred, no one knew what the fuck was going to happen next kind of feeling about, everything from being in the writer's room, which a lot of times wasn't even a writer's room. It was just a bunch of cubicles kind of shoved together, and people would just kind of spin around in their chair and go, what about this idea? That's kind of the feeling it was when you were in part of Attack of the Show. Some of the other shows, because all the cinematographers, we would work on multiple shows. We wouldn't just be on Attack of the Show. Would be on X-Play. We would do the live events like at CES or E3. So we saw everything. And where something like X-Play was much more structured, they would have between Matt Kyle and Paul and Casey and all the producers who worked on there was more structure. There were scripts. There were plans, if you will, schedules. Attack of the Show, no. I mean, I can barely remember there being any time that we would be like thrown into a situation where it's like, guys, you got to go down to the LA Convention Center and you got to shoot, the intro for E3. And it's going to be Zach Selwyn and Guy Branum or Casey, or just go. That's all it was. There was this gleeful abandon that was installed in everything that we did for that show. And that's everything from the writing to how the talent was incorporated to the producers, all the way down to us and the camera crew, because we were the ones who were having to put it together. And then, of course, the editors. So that kind of punk rock attitude, it felt like every day was a Steadicam shot through the office, where you would, like if you remember like some of the Steadicam shots from like say A Futile and Stupid Gesture or Boogie Nights or whatever, where you would just be kind of catching glimpses of the process all the way up to the point where we would go live. And that would not just be the packages, that would be, anything that they would come up for Kevin and Olivia that day. Like, oh my God, there's a huge wrestler's ring that is going to be constructed for this day. And then they're going to rip it down immediately because they got to do another live show. You never knew what was going to happen. And I think that was not for everybody. I remember there was a few producers who just, came from other networks, or they were just so new and green that they just couldn't keep up. That's kind of the attitude that everyone had, was just keep up.
Because we don't have time. And in a live format like that, you don't have the ability to stop and contemplate what was going to happen next, and things like, permits or call sheets. Fuck all that noise. You didn't need any of it. As long as you had a producer who knew what they were basically looking for, the talent who had an idea of where they needed to be, what they needed to say, and the camera crew and the audio crew who could just get the basics. This was also at a time where 24p was becoming popular. And anybody who doesn't know, 24p was a video format that kind of simulated film. So just by having those cameras, there was this particular camera called the DVX100, which was a Panasonic camera that allowed us to shoot both 60 frames per second, which is what you normally see for news pieces or lifestyle pieces, which we always did. Or if we wanted to do something where, Mike Shaw wanted to recreate a scene from Batman, or something from a Fast and the Furious movie or whatever, we would be able to do that because we could just go, and now it looks like film. And I would take two pieces of masking tape and put them on the top and the bottom of the viewfinder to give me a 2-3-5-1 look. And that's the sort of stuff that we would have to come up with on the day. So spontaneity was both our best friend and, to some people, their worst enemy. Because if you couldn't come up with shit on the day, and I think that's where a lot of the people who were in the writing staff were stand-up comedians, or stand-up comedian writers, or just, comedy writers. I mean, look at Jerry Duggan, look at Blair Butler. All those guys were so good in the room, but they could also they were also good on camera. Blair Butler is a great example of that, where you could kind of do anything. And that was the thing that I loved the most about that show, was that we could do anything. And if you were up for it, if you had the gumption, if you had that go-to attitude, you could be able to go from just doing camera work to even doing on-camera stuff. I mean, I'm a perfect example. I was a camera guy for like my first stint, and then I went away and I did my first movie, which was Wrong Turn 2. Then I came back when I needed a job because I thought, I'm making movies now. See ya, fellas. And then I saw how much I made. I'm like, you know what? It might be smart of me to go back and get regular work. And thankfully, G4 was very, very cool with that. And they hired me to be the online creative director for G4TV.com, which obviously had a major component in Attack of the Show, and we were making pieces for Attack of the Show. So now I'm heading up an entire department creatively, thanks to Rob Juster and Josh Crane. And then through that, I ended up going away and then coming back again, and then being an on-air personality for Attack of the Show, which... Sidebar, I was, and I think the person who's listening to this knows, I was a huge fan of Film Threat and Chris Gore. So when they brought Chris Gore into the fold as part of Attack of the Show, to me, as a huge fan of transgressive cinema and punk rock film and everything that Film Threat stood for, that to me was a vote of confidence that, holy shit, they're bringing Chris Gore, who was basically like the indie king at the time, and maybe still now, but he was an icon to so many of us. And being in film and to be able to kind of hobnob with him and to be able to do some of his segments was such a thrill. And then there were times where Chris wasn't available, so they're like, well, why don't we let Joe do it, because he seems to know about movies and such, I guess. And next thing you know, I'm doing segments that are going on the air for Attack of the Show. So the point is that Attack of the Show exploited the talent, and I mean that in the highest sense, knowing that there were people who wanted to go the extra yard, that they weren't just going to be complacent about, well, I got my producer job here, I can run this into the ground and you know, have my tenure at G4 and then retire to the islands. That's not how it works. They knew that there were going to be, you know, really talented artists who were really hungry, who wanted to prove themselves, and here was an opportunity that they could show what they got in a way that the show and even G4 in general could exploit to its fullest. And it definitely led to a lot of people kind of moving on into, you know, higher things. I mean, look at Gavin Purcell. Started in Attack of the Show, and I remember the day that he got poached for Jimmy Fallon. I was there when it happened, and everyone went, of course, that makes total sense, you know? So G4 was the best stepping stone for so many artists to show off their wares, prove their worth, and really express themselves. Now, in terms of the Attack of the Show title, I was there. This happened in the original office. This was at the Olympic Boulevard office when a general email went out, and the word around the campfire was that we were looking for, or the live show was looking for a new title. And they had asked everybody, and that was one of the beautiful things about that network was that, and I believe this to be true, and I think this was something that I learned and I've applied in my filmmaking as well, is that anybody can have a great idea. Anyone. It doesn't matter if you're an executive or one of the writers or producers or the executive producer of the show or the director of the show or the talent, all the way down to the camera guys and the PAs and the people who are doing the catering every day. Anybody can have a good idea. If they love the show, if they love what it stands for, then their creative output could be the thing that is the linchpin, no pun, into where the show goes next or what that iconic name could be. It could come from anywhere. So when the word came out, everybody had titles. I wish I remember some of mine. I remember submitting like 10. But that was the thing. It didn't feel like they were just placating the talent that was there. They genuinely knew that these ideas could come from anywhere. So I was working with Mike Shaw at the time, who was one of the producers of what ultimately became Attack of the Show. And I remember when he was kind of coming up with these ideas and he was spitballing everybody, we were, the way that the office worked out or was laid out was it was very much like a bullpen. It was all of these cubicles that you could, if you just kind of raise your head about 8 inches, you could see across the landscape of all these nerds just kind of whittling away and working away really hard. You could pitch stuff. And I remember Mike kind of like spitballing ideas. And Mike was one, like, to me, Mike was one of the, like, real voices of that show because he was one of the people who was tasked every day to come up with shit that was supposed to be funny and irreverent and on brand, incorporate pop culture, incorporate video games, and really just be a voice of the show. And he took it to the nth degree. Like, he was such a great guy to work with. His whole team was awesome. But I remember him kind of spitballing all these ideas, and then he ended up kind of coming up with this manifesto about why the name Attack of the Show with the exclamation point was the perfect way to represent not only what the show was, but what G4 was. Because we had, up to that point, we had titles for shows, like I mentioned before, like Pulse and X-Play and Arena, that felt, I wouldn't say stale. They just felt a little familiar. They just felt like, of course, a video game network would have these types of titles for their shows. But there was something about Attack of the Show, exclamation point, that felt very much like what we were trying to go for and what the founding fathers of the network were trying to go for. Something unique, something different, something a little meta, something that was going to kind of turn the mirror back onto pop culture and kind of spit in its face, but then wipe it off and give you a kiss at the same time. That, to me, was what Mike was going for when he read this thing. And when I remember when it ultimately got announced that that Attack of the Show was going to be the title, I do remember there being this very weird tension in the air. Now, I didn't hear everybody's titles, but that's the thing. When you were a camera guy, you were working with everybody. So we would hear the gossip from the X-Play people. We would hear the gossip or just the diatribes from the other departments and the like Icons, the documentary series that I ended up doing stuff for. We heard it from everybody, and there was this weird tension in the air when that got announced, because there were some people who absolutely loved it, like myself. I just thought that that's the perfect title, and then there were some people like, that's never going to work. And I even remember a few people, I'm not going to name their names, but that they wanted off the show based on that title because they thought, well, that makes no sense. It's a stupid title. Why jump on a ship now if you call it Titanic, or Titanic 2.0? This isn't going to work. And yet, I'll never forget when we were in, I think it was E3 the next year, and hearing people see us, the crew guys who, we've been on camera a couple times, be like, Attack of the Show! When you hear that screamed out live in an event like CES or E3, it just had something exciting about hearing that title screamed out at people, or somebody like Terry Gilliam saying oh, Attack of the Show, I really like that show. What? Terry Gilliam likes that show? What the fuck? So it sometimes innovation is going to brush up against some people the wrong way. I personally feel like if it was an easy answer for some kind of title, it might not have lasted. But Attack of the Show just felt like there was no other show out there, no other programming or content, if you will, that was out there that took the chance on a title like that. And that's all due to Mike Shaw.
Well, I got to ask, one, I'm dying to find out what some of the other proposed titles were, because I'm sure that they were terrible. I'm sure they were terrible and obvious. Or at least oh, that's sort of getting there. When you, in any writing process, you're like, all right, time to get all the bad ideas out. So you make lists.
The one that I remember specifically that I don't know if anyone else remembers this, but I can't remember who said it, but it was one that I remember hearing that was close, was Game Day. And I'm like, well, that kind of makes sense. Game Day, it's a daily show about games, or is it? Those were some of the suggestions that were being made that, again, it's just why go with the safe bet? That's the thing that I think was the impetus behind going with something that is not marketing wise is not very savvy, I guess. Attack of the Show, what is this show and why are people attacking it? But Game Day felt like, oh, okay, I guess I can see that. I know for a fact that people who had to ultimately make that decision didn't want to go with a title that was a shrug. Attack of the Show, that's not a shrug, that's what the fuck is that? But wouldn't you rather have someone say, what the fuck is that, than, yeah, I get it. It's because Attack of the Show didn't even know what it was on any given day. Yes, there was a format. Yes, there was a semblance of a structure. Yes, there were segments that led you from the beginning titles to the end credits. But again, you didn't know what you were going to get. And that's not just the audience. That's the people who were making it. It was so willy-nilly that why not have something that can ultimately encompass so many different versions of what a live show and a pop culture show and a show about, media in general. Why not have something that is so weird and so nebulous that if someone said, Attack of the Show, what is this? Is this a gaming show? Yes. Is it a pop culture TV movie book music show? Yes. it could be anything. And I think some people could see that as being unfocused. To me, I felt like that was like going to like Upright Citizens Brigade on a Tuesday night and not knowing what you're going to get, but you're going to ultimately be so satisfied because you're just seeing people and using their creative id in the best way possible.
Dude, yeah, I agree. Game Day, I hadn't heard that one. That one's awesome. That's I'm curious. Can you tell a little bit, if you recall that? I know Mike Shaw sent the memo. Brian Keller said that there was he read it aloud. Do you have that manifesto? Like, I've asked everybody.
No, I wish I did. I had it. If I did have it, it was probably on the laptop that I had for the longest time with all my G4 shit, and it's gone now. Like it's like the Dead Sea Scrolls of gaming manifestos at this point.
Well, I'll find it somewhere, because I know I'm talking to Gavin Purcell. At some point, I'm going to be talking to Mike Shaw. What I'm doing with a lot of these interviews is like helping form like what questions I'll ask them, right? Yeah. So it's having that evolve. So now another question. So you were involved in some amazing, I would say sort of milestone aspects of the show. Can you tell like some of the things that you bore witness to, that you were a part of, whether it was like, Kevin Pereira's mustache on Arena, or like Olivia Munn's first day? What I'm looking for is historical anecdotes related to, I have this whole, because I've had people anonymously helping me with like, just to get the facts straight on what happened on certain days. And I'm making sure to fact check everything. So I've got at least multiple sources for like, this happened on a certain day. Mm-hmm. One person told an interesting story when Olivia was kind of on her way out. She made this big announcement to the crew that like, hey, I just want you to know that I'm committed to Attack of the Show. I'm going to be here and I'm not going anywhere. And 4 days later, she quit. And then that someone recorded that video, and as a goof, they would play that video in studio to Kevin just to get him to laugh. I'm getting a hard drive with stuff that no one knows about, because part of how this project evolved was I was working on the Film Threat doc, and I was just archiving all my stuff, 100 hours of VHS video shot in the 90s, 5,000 photographs from the 90s, 80s and 90s. And then I was looking through and I'm like, oh, I have like all this photos that I took on my like Razor, or my Moto Q, like these phones we had at the time. And I'm like, I've got a lot of Attack of the Show stuff, like impromptu stuff or video that I personally shot. Like, and I'm like, oh, I wonder if there's a doc in this. So I kind of archived it and put it together. And I realized I'm not the only person that did that. So there's a lot of like, I really think at the end of the day, my hope for like, one, this is like a gift to the fans of like, here's your inside view of like stuff you never knew about the show. But for everyone who worked on the show, it's going to be like the ultimate wedding video.
Yeah, exactly. Like seeing, like reminding us of, oh my God, I totally remember shooting that, or being out in, in the thick of things. All right. So with,
where I'm going. So historical anecdotes, like the things that were like big moments, whether it was like, I have like 5 people telling the story of Olivia jumping in the pie. It's like the Zapruder film. That's, I think, how we'll approach it. But, like, can you tell some historical anecdotes that you were actually witness to that you can talk about? One person told a really touching story about Kevin's last day on set, and he had like a card and a gift, and like, we have video footage of him like receiving this gift on his last day, and just like how like emotional it was. But can you think in your mind, like what were the historical things, and then tell those individual anecdotal pieces?
One thing that I was privy to witnessing in my tenure at Attack of the Show, and again, I started out as a camera guy for Arena back in the day. I was on set for Kevin Pereira's first on-screen appearance when he had this douchey little mustache, and he was, a little bit on the green side. I remember from what I remember, they actually replaced him because of someone else not working out. So Kevin ended up kind of stepping in, and he kind of blew everybody away. I was actually his cameraman for when we were doing kind of cutaways from one pod of people playing to another. And, like there's something that can be said about when you know that someone has it, that thing, that star quality thing. And I had heard about Kevin a little bit, from Jim Downs and from Scott Rubin. There's this kid that we're bringing in now that is a little on the green side, but he's got a lot of passion. He obviously knows his shit. And I'll never forget it. I remember shooting this, and this was it was like live to tape. But Kevin addressed the camera, and when you are shooting something like that, when someone is looking down the barrel at you, you do have a relationship with that person, the cameraman and the on-screen talent. And a lot of times that can kind of dictate how wide you want to be, how close you want to be, how long, or do you want to, have a little bit of a move or something like that to make something a little more dynamic. And there was something so exciting about watching Kevin evolve on camera, not just from that first day, but all the way through until what was, ultimately his last day. At that point, I wasn't really shooting anymore. I was doing stuff for G4TV.com, but I had the show on every day on the screen. When we were in that office at the E office, we migrated from, when we migrated from CBGB's to Madison Square Garden, so to speak, for the G4 team, that was going like mega corporate. But they would make it so that everybody's offices had the show playing live, and we could all watch it. And watching Kevin evolve from that first day until, again, his last day, it was such a proud moment, as like a fellow creative. I don't want to sound like, hey, that's my boy, noogie, noogie, noogie. No, it was watching someone who truly had, very little experience in that field, and being on camera like that and being the voice of a network, because Kevin was us. That was something that I knew from some of the other hosts that we had employed, that I had seen cycle through, especially for like the news network. There was something about Kevin that was so relatable and so down to earth. He felt like the dude that sat next to you when you were playing a game, that wasn't going to be an asshole and be like, dude, can I play? He was going to be the guy that was like, oh no, you know what? You got to check, like go around the corner there and get the power up there, and being that cool friend that you wanted to hang out with every day. And I think that really was one of the smartest things that Attack of the Show could have done, was have Kevin be that, that way in. Olivia was, a different personality, but also played off Kevin really well. But to see Kevin evolve from that first day to that last day was so exciting, because he never stopped reminding the audience that he was your buddy. And that was really the biggest strength of Kevin's persona. Now, one of my favorite memories with Kevin was we started going to Tokyo for the Tokyo Game Show. And we had gone twice. The second time I had gone, I was going with the drift racing show called Street Fury. But the first time, it was they scooped up pretty much the entire office and vaulted us 17 hours across the way to lovely Tokyo for the Tokyo Game Show. And we were there for 17 days, and it was absolutely fucking nuts. Everything from getting there the first night, and me and Kevin and I believe it was Sessler, a bunch of the producers, were told very, very strictly, do not go to sleep when you get to the hotel. So all of us go out to karaoke until 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning and then pass out. And then we had 14 to 16 hour days every day, ad nauseum. It was crazy. Now, this is a bit of a long story, so you can use this for the archives if you want. But so we were there for like almost 2 weeks. We had a lot to cover. We had to do, every day live hits. We were doing packages. And one of my favorite packages that we ever did, that is one of my favorite memories of just being on a shoot, was Brian Keller came up with this gag called, I believe, is the Kotaku squid. It was a giant squid that was supposed to look like one of the kaiju from, a Godzilla movie.
And our idea, or at least his idea, and we were there to exact it, was that this giant purple squid was going to run around Tokyo and just kind of annoy people. And Kevin was going to be part of that. So one morning we had to, like, one of the ideas was that we were going to go to this famous fish market in Tokyo, where we were just going to run around and see what was going to happen with this squid. I can't remember who. I think it might have been Keller as the squid too. So the producer was in this squid costume. It was me and AP, the audio guy, and Kevin. And it was like 5 o'clock in the morning. And the reason why we had to get up so early was that's when all the fish markets open, and that's where all the fresh fish come in. So 5 o'clock in the morning, these dumbass fucking Americans are running around this huge fish market that is just packed with people, with tuna that is bigger than an actual person, just laid out. It was like it was a concentration camp of tuna. It was nuts. And we're running around this thing, and Kevin is narrating it the whole time. And there were people who had knives that were coming up against us, like, while we were running through. It was fucking crazy. And then after we had done that package, and it was like 6 o'clock in the morning, everyone's hungry. So we ended up going to a sushi place that was right next door. And I'll never forget seeing one of these huge body-like tunas going into the sushi place, and then about 10 minutes later coming out again on our plates. That's some of the crazy shit that would happen on these shoots at all times. And then but 10 minutes later we go out again, and Kevin's like, I want ice cream. Oh, look, there's ice cream right there. And it was black squid ink ice cream, which kind of felt apropos to the fact that we were dealing with this squid character. But yeah, like, it was just, you never knew what you were going to get next. Funny little sidebar end note to that trip was my uncle had told me that never walk around Japan with your passport. I don't know where this advice came from, but he's like, put your passport in the safe so that it doesn't get stolen. Well, on our final day, Kevin and I and a bunch of other people were running around the city trying to get, like, knickknacks and other gifts for our families and stuff like that, T-shirts, just anything that we can get from Tokyo. And in our mad dash to go from that to the airport, I forgot my passport. And we got all the way to the airport, and this was post 9/11. So this is 2005. It was around 2005, and I had forgotten my passport at the hotel and didn't realize it until we got to the airport. The guy one of the security guards opens up our van with a machine gun, is checking everyone's passport. Shockingly, he didn't check mine. He just kind of said, generally, do you have your passports? And by the time we got there to the airport, I was like, my passport is not here. Fuck. Thankfully, Kevin and Brian Keller were like, calm down. It's all good. Here's what we do. Go back and get your passport. Maybe if you come back, if you have the time, you can jump on the next flight. We'll pay for it. If not, you're going to have to get another flight. So I got back on the bus and cried the entire way back. There's an hour ride from the airport to the hotel. And the people at the hotel were so nice to us the entire time, and we were stupid Americans just being loud and brash, but they tolerated us. They were like, we're so sorry that you left your passport here. Let us give you a free night in the hotel in a beautiful new room, and you'll get the next flight the next day. So I got on the flight. I got to the hotel. I found my passport. I cried the entire night. I bought a bottle of sake. And I, just for shits and giggles, I set up my camera outside the window because in that part of town, there was this beautiful neon clock that we, that just had, big neon clock with the arms and everything. And I put it on time lapse and went out. Brendan, the production manager, had showed me all the best places to go to eat. So I just had a bottle of sake and walked around town and left the camera on. And the next morning I got up and checked the tape again, and it was this amazing time-lapse shot watching all, like, the Tokyo cityscape from this time clock. I got back and I showed it to Keller, and he's like, oh, we're using this on Attack of the Show. This is a perfect interstitial to go in and out of our Tokyo package. So they ultimately paid me for that extra day because I shot that time-lapse shot. And again, that was not planned at all. So that was the kind of crazy punk rock attitude that Attack of the Show had, where you could leave your passport and get paid to do it.
I wonder where that advice came from. Like, remember, don't carry your passport with you. Like, what a weird...
I do not know where that came from, but I thought, well, that makes sense. I don't want to get my pocket picked. So yeah, I'll put it in the safe and then I'll remember when to take it out. But we were just so concerned about getting like cool Tokyo t-shirts and little action figures that I just totally forgot. And I swear to God, I thought I was going to get deported. It was fucking nuts. But in the end, I got paid for it. So yay, thanks, Attack of the Show.
And I have to see that time lapse.
I'll send it to you. It's still online and it's fucking awesome. But yeah, they ended up using it for a bunch of stuff for that whole Tokyo trip. Which, when did I ever think I would be able to go to Tokyo at that time? You know, but that's kind of what Attack of the Show stood for. Is we could go anywhere, do anything, as long as it felt like you were going along with friends. And that's the reason why. Having someone like Kevin, especially Kevin, like Olivia had her own fans, but Kevin was something special because he felt like he was our friend who just got a fucking great break. And even if it was a great break, he still felt like humble enough to be your buddy. He felt like Vinny Chase on Entourage, where, if you remember watching that show, there was something very accessible about that guy. That made you want to be his friend and him to be your friend. And here's a controller, push start and let's play together. That was Kevin's vibe from day one until day 0 at the end.
Well, the thing I know just about working with Kevin is the best person I ever worked with in television, period, bar none. Knew every person's name on set, and I couldn't say that for myself. I was sort of ushered in by a producer, did my job, ushered out. Everyone knew me because I was on camera, right? But I didn't know every single person, all the moving parts. So I just really admired just his work ethic. And I always felt that Kevin, his role was to be an instigator. He was effectively, in the cast of characters, he was Bugs Bunny. He was there to instigate and to be the foil and to get you to kind of up your game. And yeah, so can't say enough good things about him. What other things can you tell me? Because I know we're running out of time. You said 90 minutes, which is going to be in 20 minutes from now, and I'm not even halfway through my questions. So it's as long as you
keep it short. No, we're good.
But like, I want to ask you about and I'll plant some seeds. So I want to ask about like sort of what you would consider to be the best and worst moments, and anything that would be supported by footage that I can have access to. Like, what were some of the best and worst moments of the show that you may have been involved in? And then additionally, I want to talk about the legacy of Attack of the Show and the cultural impact. I'm of the personal opinion that YouTube would not be what it is today without Attack of the Show showing you can just be a guy who loves movies and you can talk about it on YouTube. You can be a person who just loves and is passionate about comic books or video games, and you can because if you remember back when Attack of the Show was around, YouTube, the maximum size clip you could upload was 10 minutes. Now YouTube has evolved into something different, but I look at like the current day YouTube and the sort of authenticity of the voices. And I think that the original Attack of the Show, the reason it spoke to so many people and it was so like appointment watching, it was like this thing where we collectively all watched it. It was the authenticity. And that really was driven by Kevin. It was, even when things went great, they were great. And when things went bad on the show, like a bit didn't work out or some prop failed or something, It was still great because it was funny because we were along for the ride. He was authentic. He would call out the just weirdness happening on the show as the show was happening. So that sort of having that as sort of the prevailing tone, I think really influenced a lot of people in terms of how they could also like, because I'm not a TV guy. I never aspired to be a TV guy. I kind of fell into it because somebody thought I wrote funny reviews on the internet in 1997. And then I got like a job on the X show, which was like the man show thing.
Yeah,
then
I remember that.
Every job led to the next job. I didn't really audition. I would just be called in for a meeting and they're like, we're going to have you do this thing. So, but that was with Gavin, I guess the thing is, my questions are, what would you consider to be the sort of best and worst, best and the worst? And by worst can also mean a good thing. And then also,
okay.
Also the cultural impact and the legacy of the show and what that means and why till today. I mean, I'll say this. I've done a bunch of TV. No one ever mentions that stuff. Everyone mentions Attack of the Show. I know for a fact, having done as much television as I did, and then just having done Attack of the Show, everyone just like, it's like that show. It was a thing where I believe people, whether they had it, whether they were watching it or it was on in the background, and I talked to a guy who has a comic book store, and he's like, oh, we played it in the store. Like it was just like on in the store, and people would stick around and they'd be watching the episode as they'd be shopping for their comics. Like I know. And same thing with like, obviously GameStop, right? Like had Attack of the Show playing on the TV. It was a thing that was consumed in a way that was, we live in such a fractured time now in terms of like how we consume things, and things are gobbled up maybe a little too quickly. Like this was a thing that like people experienced and then talked about after, and then things became a thing. Like the McHammer thing pops out to me. Yeah. That's something definitely going to be. But so I'm being long-winded. I'm going to cut the podcast version, but I'm being long-winded to kind of like plant like kind of what I'm looking for is like best and the worst, or the worst that kind of turn into the best, and then the cultural impact and legacy of the show and what it's kind of meant to pop culture. Because I mean, I can tell you from personal experience, having gone to so many Comic-Cons, it left a cultural impact that resonates to now. It resonates to now. So I want to hear all your thoughts on that.
Okay. So there's so many memories that I have for Attack of the Show. Weirdly enough, they kind of all blend together because, again, it was a live show. So any really exciting thing that happened on Tuesday, you had to forget that because you still had Wednesday's show and so on and so forth. Now, the most experience that I had with Attack of the Show was I would shoot a lot of their packages or go out to live events. And then when I came back, I would do when I came back to be the creative director at G4TV.com, ultimately a lot of our segments ended up on Attack of the Show. So we were also like segment producers for the show itself. But if you're in the office, more times than not, you're going to hear someone like running down the hallway going, we need as many warm bodies as possible on the set right now. Go downstairs or go down the hallway because we need a crew behind it, like cheering along. And this, I think you could file under worst experience that I had on Attack of the Show, which I'm sure for the show was fucking great. But there was an event, and I'm pretty sure it had to do with BattleBots. And they had a ring, and the art department had made this crazy wall that went behind the ring that was just part of the decollage. It was just part of the set. And we had all been rounded up by Brendan Hermes, the production manager, to be in the background to cheer along, for this event that was supposed to have like an audience. So as we're there, and it was just basically everybody who didn't have anything to do or just felt like being on camera, we would just be there and be cheering along. So right before commercial break, Kevin is throwing to commercial, and they have it where you have the first ADs and the crew's going like, come on, and everyone's cheering along. Woo! Well, I backed up a little too far and bumped into this like glass and plastic background that was being held up by wooden planks, not the sturdiest of production design, I guess. And next thing I know, I feel it moving towards me and leaning closer and closer. Now, this is a huge, like 10-foot by 10-foot piece of set that could kill someone if fallen on them wrong. And next thing I know, I bump into it and I turn around and this thing is coming towards me and everyone else. And I remember turning around, holding this thing. And there was a brief moment, a very brief moment where I'm like, I got this. I've got this. It might've been my fault. I don't want to tell anybody at the moment, but I think I got this. And then those 3 seconds passed and this thing came crashing down in front of everyone. It was a disaster. It went everywhere. And we're at commercial break. And that commercial break is usually between, a minute 30 and 2 minutes. There was absolutely no way that they were going to clean this up for that moment. I don't know if it got caught on camera, but it was one of the most embarrassing moments of my life because, the thing crashes down, the dust settles, and there's me in the middle going, sorry. And then everyone's scrambling around, brooming shit up. I mean, we're all grabbing shit and kind of just throwing it aside just so that maybe you wouldn't see this total disaster and this mess. I'm sure in the control booth, they were all freaking out because it's like, holy crap, part of our set just got destroyed by Joe. What the fuck? So that was embarrassing as hell. But I remember Kevin, I think when we came back, Kevin just played it off perfectly. He didn't say my name. He might have said my name. But it was incredibly embarrassing for me, but I'm sure it was hilarity to the audience that we had a set that basically fell apart on my TV. So that would definitely be one of the worst experiences. One of my favorite experiences, and I can't really say gauge it as part of a particular segment, but there was one writer who I was in total awe of. His name was John Walsh, and John was this huge, lumbering bear of a man who wrote for not just Attack of the Show, but for other shows as well. But every time that we would go out and do segments, one of my favorites was when we weren't doing something like a live event, because John was a comedian. And that was one of the smart things about the show, was that they got comedians on camera, not having coffee, but actually interacting with people and getting really funny stuff where you would expect an EPK package or a red carpet event for the Dwayne Johnson Doom adaptation to be pretty cut and dry. Not with John Walsh, who made that event. If you can go back and find that in the archives, I highly recommend it, because the stuff that comes out of John Walsh's mouth was absolute comedy gold. And again, kind of like Kevin Pereira, when you're a filmmaker, when you're a creative and you're using, talent as your vestibule for whether you're getting off comedy or, a perfectly dramatic moment, and you're not doing it yourself, you have to rely on this talent to be able to do it. And when you have someone like Kevin who can make things seem so effortless and to be, again, just one of the guys, John Walsh was this force of nature, but he was so nice and so heartwarming to people, and then cut you down cold with one of the greatest one-liners that he can just come up with on a whim. And it was I remember there was a moment with him and The Rock, and I can't remember if it got used or not in the package, but there was a moment between them that I think at that moment The Rock got insulted, and then in a second later realized that I better be in on the joke here. And it was a moment where I was shooting the camera and just going either John Walsh is going to get punched in the face or he's going to get a hug from The Rock. I don't think either happened, but there was a moment there, and that was that was just John Walsh in a nutshell.
Some of my other favorite moments of being part of Attack of the Show, one was just being on camera. Again, I started out as a camera guy, and then went away, and then came back and was part of the production from a G4TV.com sensibility. But then while I was there, I also became part of the talent pool, mainly because Chris Gore was drunk one day and didn't decide to come in, and they went like, get me the next guy with big hair immediately who knows about movies and shit. And next thing I know, I'm at Dark Delicacies doing a segment for DVD Doomsday, which, again, I was a huge fan of Chris Gore. So to take his mantle, I guess, I mean, he still did the show, but I was doing these remotes. I had never been on camera before, like in that respect. And to be on Attack of the Show, like, I knew people who watched this show, so I couldn't fuck up here. It was really nerve-wracking. I remember, like, the producer who was on site that day kept having to pat me down with a napkin because I was sweating profusely because I didn't want to screw this up. And then to get back, and then I think it was a package that was made the next day, but being in my office and seeing myself on camera, that was a pivotal moment for me. Years later, I ended up acting on a TV sitcom, and that unto itself was a daunting task. But I remember specifically being on that sitcom, being on set on that sitcom, sweating profusely, and reminding myself, like, I remember being like in that weird remote shoot going, it doesn't get any better than this. And maybe in some ways it didn't, because I felt so much myself. Because the thing that they knew about me was I'm a huge movie fan. I'm a huge genre movie fan. And like Chris Gore, there's nothing better than to recommend movies to people. Like, that's, to us, that's communication. And that's what Attack of the Show was. It was relating to the audience and then recommending things that maybe they would like as well, in a whether it was movies or TV or music or what have you. And that was the thing that I really loved about the show. And now I'm getting to do it as well. It was a very overwhelming, humbling, and exciting moment in my life that I was, another movie expert in the Attack of the Show talent pool. That was amazing. So in addition to those, one of my other favorite memories of being part of Attack of the Show was when I was part of the G4TV.com component of Attack of the Show. We had a moment where we were allowed to interview the Trailer Park Boys. And if you don't know who the Trailer Park Boys are, it's this TV show in Canada about three guys that a camera crew follows, kind of like The Office in a way, but the Canuck version of The Office. Really funny show. I was a huge fan at the time because I had just been in Vancouver shooting my first movie. So when I came back, I was telling everybody about this show. And Zach Selwyn, who was one of the hosts, knew who the guys were. So they're like, well, why don't we just send you up to Vancouver and do a segment on them? And on the plane, Zach and I came up with this idea, because the show is about a film crew following these three schmoes. Why not do something similar to that, where we ended up going to their hotel room and they take us hostage. And these guys, if you don't know the show, these guys were hilarious. And it was just me, Zach, and a camera in this room in Vancouver, where I actually brought a prop gun through customs. I don't know how we did it. That gun came from a shopping spree that Kevin Pereira and I did when we were in Tokyo, and we actually got these airsoft guns, which at the time, shockingly, we were able to pull through customs. I brought that gun as a prop, which looked very realistic, and we ended up using that in the segment, which we came up with pretty much on the day. Now, why did I bring a gun with me, like a fake airsoft gun with me through customs, just for something that we came up with on the day? That was Attack of the Show, where I'm like, hey, maybe I'll use that in something. And we brought it with us. And we ended up making this amazing segment that is still one of my favorite things that I've done for G4, where the Trailer Park Boys took us hostage and then got us really drunk. And And that was one of those things, again, that if this was a more structured format, I don't think we would have been able to get away with. I've been on plenty of shows since that tried to have that same kind of sensibility, whether it was standards and practices that got in the way, whether it was executives who were a little too afraid of being able to get away with the sort of shit that we did on Attack of the Show, what have you. But Attack of the Show will always remind me of that meme that came out a couple years ago of Joey Pants in The Matrix holding up a piece of steak and saying, "Ignorance is bliss." That was Attack of the Show. Ignorance was bliss, and it made for really good TV.
Dude, that's awesome. That's got to go in the doc. I will say this: you mentioned John Walsh earlier. We are going to do a tribute to people who are no longer here, and it's shocking to me that the list you have Jim Downs, who passed away. I think it was 2016.
Yeah.
Monica Acuna recently.
I didn't know that.
Like, I couldn't believe it. So, and of course, John Walsh, but it's so funny. I knew John. He wrote for Film Threat in the 90s. And he was
I remember that.
He's a great weirdo. I mean, I always loved John. He was so, God, I remember one time he sort of flaked on a writing assignment I had for him. I think he apologized for that every time I saw him. And I'm like, John, I don't even remember. Like it's okay. Like, we would assign stories sometime back in the 90s. I mean, what tools did we have back then? Not everybody had cell phones at all. I don't think I ever
barely.
Yeah, technology. He was in New York, and he was he'd write for Film Thread every once in a while, and it's just I think he was assigned something and just didn't deliver it. So yeah, whatever. It's all good, we got backup. It's fine. But yeah, so we'll be doing one of my favorite bits that he did. Do you remember where he would do this thing where, I don't know if he did this for X-Play or for Attack the Show. I don't remember, but I remember thinking it was such genius. And it was, Jor-El, Kal-El's father, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he's doing the Marlon Brando from Superman,
I think that was for Attack of the Show.
And he did this bit where he was giving advice, but it was really inconsequential advice. Like, when you shave against the grain. It was just
I think that was Attack of the Show.
It was so dumb. And it was just okay, I've got all this life advice. Now he's giving advice on the most minor things. And it was just really, it was, oh God. So we are, I will be handling, that in the doc, because it really, like I say, I know this sounds weird, but I think you understand, the ultimate wedding video is, if you worked on the show in any capacity and you watch this doc, you're going to say, wow, this is an accurate representation. These are stories that I knew most of them, but not all of them. Mm-hmm. And I really hope that I even hired a composer on it, because there's certain emotional moments that I really want to play up in the doc of things that happen. And then there are also bits throughout the doc that would be consistent with a bit that would be like Zach Selwyn going around, iconic places and telling songs that kind of are segues for different things. And
that's great.
It's really funny. So he's going to be this Greek chorus running throughout the doc. And then there's sort of a present day story involving me a little bit, and then the return of Attack of the Show, because it's kind of have to start from the end and go, and then tell the story of the show from then and off to the. So on that note, can you put in your words? And I know you we're past 90 minutes, so just let me know how much longer we can go.
No, I got another 5 minutes, if that's okay.
Gotcha. Okay. So let's get to this thing. And I may need to do a follow-up interview later, but in a couple months, after we've got some stuff cut off.
Yeah, dude, whatever you need. Seriously, it's not that big a deal.
Yeah. I'll show you what we're working on, so you can kind of get the tone down. You know what? I got the music for the opening montage. I'm kind of dying to send it to you, just as a filmmaker.
Please.
So this is the opening music, which kind of sets a tone. It's not the documentary you think it's going to be. It's a lot of member berries and very leaning into emotion about an era when we didn't fight all the time on the internet.
Oh, wow.
And it's my part of my hope with this documentary is to remind people of that time, because it would be nice to get back to a little bit of that time when we got along and we looked for ways to find more things in common than things that divide us.
Mm-hmm.
So
no, I think that's great.
It's an ulterior motive that I have that's not really going to be on the surface, but is something that is important to me. So I'll send you the music for the opening montage. I'll also send you the password on Vimeo for the current cut of the Film Threat documentary, which
yes, please do. Please. I love that.
Because but my final question, and there's a few I didn't get to, but so 2 questions, and see what you can do in 5 minutes. The legacy of Attack of the Show, what it meant, what does it mean now, sort of its place in pop culture, and is there anything I didn't ask that you want to add? And we can do another session if you have time. We can do another session. Yeah. The stuff I'm getting here is gold. Like you and Casey, I think it doesn't surprise me because you're both writers. Like the best stuff is coming from the writers, like.
Oh, the camera guy.
But yeah, filmmaker. You're a filmmaker and an actor, and so you have like.
I know the kind of sound bites you need. So,
dude, you're so legacy. And maybe anything I didn't ask you, we can save for another time. But really, to the legacy of Attack and like what it meant and how it affected. What does it mean? Like, at the end of the day, what does the show mean? What does it leave as its legacy?
Well, in terms of legacy, the Attack of the Show legacy, what did it leave us with? Because we are 10 years removed essentially from when it was in our lives every day, and not just in our lives from an audience standpoint, but from a crew member standpoint, from a creative standpoint, from watching, walking by every morning and seeing that writer's room and seeing everyone freaking out and seeing the board and how the board would change every day and how that would permeate through the entire office. The legacy that I think Attack of the Show left us was so many talented people who were given their first shot. I liken it to something like Roger Corman, who gave us the careers of Martin Scorsese, and Ron Howard, and Francis Ford Coppola, and so many other filmmakers who were given their first shot. And if you look back at some of the talent, both in front of the camera and behind, and there's way too many to acknowledge here, but you all know who you are, and I'm sure the doc has shown you many faces that you went like, oh my God, who would have thought? That was Attack of the Show. That was our jumping off point. That was our circle of talent that on both sides of the screen that proved themselves in as much of a pressure cooker situation as you can possibly get, a live daily show that ran 4 to 5 days a week. There is nothing more exciting and terrifying than being thrown into that ring to prove yourself. And there were writers, producers, camera people, talent on both sides of the screen that were given this opportunity to run with it. And so many people have gone on to amazing careers thanks to that discipline, thanks to that structure, thanks to that voice that Attack of the Show gave us. That, to me, that was really when I came out to LA and I had no career at all other than, shooting a couple music videos here and there and, cutting porn at the time. G4 truly gave me the opportunity to have a voice. A camera guy who, usually is not given the ability to be creative at all, whether it's a producer or the writers or whoever. When the camera guys are given creative license to go out and do extra shit that's going to make this better, we did it because we loved it. Not only did we love the show, but we loved the people involved. It was a family. Screw the Fast and the Furious movies. The real family in this situation was the family from Attack of the Show. And the family from Attack of the Show that ultimately kind of permeated itself and branched out all throughout pop culture, not just on TV, but in film and in music and on the internet now. So many voices and so many people that we remember passing the hallways every day, now have their own TV shows or have their own movies or, have tech empires. And we were all there as one. And that, to me, I think is where the legacy of Attack of the Show is going to be most felt. By the time you get to the end of this documentary, hi, we're in the third act. I think you're going to see that so much of pop culture and so much of the media has been affected by this scrappy little show that was on, that maybe a bunch of people watched at first, and then maybe a bunch of people watched after they were done with Cheaters. But you can't deny the impact that Attack of the Show had on so many people. One really great example is a year before I ended up making my first feature. Now, I walked onto every set every day on G4 going, this is a stepping stone. I'm going to make the most of it, but it's still a stepping stone. I'm not going to rest on my laurels and say like, well, this is where I'm going to be the rest of my life. No, I wanted to be a film director. I was a film director. I was just biding my time until that moment. But I'll never forget being at the Comic-Con before I went to shoot, and I was there for G4. And I was a camera guy. I was there covering the event. We were let in on Wednesday and, kind of left our own devices to get cool B-roll of Harley Quinn action figures and talk to Kevin Eastman or, any of the other celebrities that were on the red carpet or whatever carpet it was on. And then just a year later, I am at Comic-Con as a director of a film that I had being squished by everyone in Hall H because I was with Henry Rollins. And just a year earlier, I was doing the same exact thing as one of those camera guys being squished because I was with Slave Olivia Munn. So it allowed me to truly appreciate every form of this creative endeavor that we call media from so many different sides. Like, I don't think any other show would have given me the opportunity to be creative as a camera person, and then as a producer, and as a writer, and then as on-camera talent. So many people have been given this gift of opportunity. And without Attack of the Show, I think pop culture would be a pretty dim place right now.
I got to do a slow clap for that one. It's just, there's so many I'm thinking in my head, like as you're talking, like, oh yeah, soundbite, yeah, use that. Yeah, I'm going to have to do a follow-up interview. You and Casey Schreiner, I think, are the two that just like, everything's like a home run, but also you'll see the doc in rough form. So you'll kind of see like,
no problem at all.
I'll share more stuff with you over the next couple of weeks. So you kind of see like, oh, that's the visual style. Oh, that's the thing. Like you'll get it. So I know you got to run. You've gone like 15 minutes over time. So thank you
all
for
good.
This. And we can get together for drinks. Burbank, love to any excuse to go to Burbank, or if you want to come to Pasadena.
Yeah, I'm leaving. I'm not far from it. I'm leaving for. I'm directing a Disney show August 13th. So I'm in town for the next couple of weeks. But let's definitely get together for drinks because I'd love to catch up.
And a Disney show I might know about, or you can't talk about?
No, it's a brand new show. I'll tell you in person. It'll be much more exciting in person.
Ooh, cool. All right, I'll send you some things by email. Get me that audio, and I'll talk to you in the next week or so. Hopefully, before you run off to do this show.
You got it, dude. All right, awesome. I'll talk to you soon.
All right, take care.
Bye.